In Ross chapter 18, we deal with the use of different conjugation patterns to render narrative sequences in the past or future sequences or instructional sequences in the non-past, typically either present or future. I have described these or at least labeled them as WCIs and WCPs, and we'll talk about that as we go on here. You'll understand what I mean by it. So let's walk through my handout here. The first thing that Ross discusses here is the past time narrative tense, and I've labeled this as WCI, and you'll see why here in a second. Many languages have a special literary tense form that they use strictly for narrating events in the past time events. For example, if any of you have ever studied French, French has a couple of past tense forms, and they use something called the passé simple for narrating past time events. Hebrew likewise has a form that is used as the backbone of narrative to push forward the sequence of narrated events in a storyline. So if I'm telling a story in Hebrew and I want to give you a sequence of events of what happened, John woke up, and then John brushed his teeth, and then John ate his breakfast, and then John went to work, I'm going to use this particular type of Hebrew verb form. Explanations of the form as we have it have led to its being labeled in a variety of ways. And so you will see this described or at least abbreviated as a WCI form, which stands for Vav consecutive imperfect. And the reason for that is because we're using what looks like imperfect verb forms, the prefix conjugation pattern, with a special Vav and a special pointing of it. And it creates what looks like consecutive action type of verb forms. So some have described this as a Vav consecutive imperfect. That's what I learned when I learned Hebrew, and I've just always kept the abbreviation WCI. Sometimes I'm tempted to drop it because it's not entirely 100% accurate. Some refer to this as a preterite plus Vav consecutive, pret plus WC. This is what Ross describes it as. It's a bit more accurate. These prefix forms are not technically imperfect forms, but they're old Hebrew preterite forms, which are prefix forms that were used for past time action, but they have a special Vav on the front of them that's not like your normal Vav. So he calls these preterites plus Vav consecutives. Others just simply call them Vayiktol forms, using katal, the verb to kill, which used to be one of the standard paradigm verbs. When you add the special Vav pointing to the form yiktol to make it Vayiktol, then that's where this name comes from. So rather than calling it a Vav consecutive, which is what a lot of people dispute, whether there really is such a notion as Vav consecutive, they just prefer to call it a Vayiktol form and cut the Gordian knot and not use a label that may be inaccurate. And then others refer to it as a Vav conversive imperfect, where in their opinion, this special Vav pointing converts the imperfect future tense semantics to past time semantics. So some grammarians like to think of that Vav as converting the semantics of the verb form. Nowadays, most grammarians dispute that, and so they don't like to use that term at all. Anyhow, I'm giving you these terms, though, because you're going to see them in textbooks, you're going to see them in articles, you're going to see them in commentaries. You need to be aware of what's being talked about when you run into the label, okay? Now, let's talk about the actual form itself. So again, I'm referring to these as WCI forms, and we're going to compare these to the Cal imperfect. So let me make this. Okay. So what you're going to notice is that the WCI form, which is here on the left, compared to the Cal imperfect form on the right, they are actually almost identical to each other. They look entirely the same except for the presence of the vav at the beginning here. And then if you notice that underneath the vav, there is a vowel point that is not normal. How do we normally see the vav pointed at the beginning of the word? The most common way is with what vowel point underneath? A vocal shiva, right? If you remember, vav comes standard with a vocal shiva. You should always expect one there. If it is a word that begins with a vocal shiva under its first consonant, or if the word begins with one of the bump letters, bet, mem, pe, then you could see the vav turn into a shurik, right? So those are my two most common ways to see the vav pointed. Notice here what I have is I don't have a shiva, I have a pathak here, and then notice that inside the nutty prefix, remember my nutty prefixes are nun, tav, yod, aleph. Those are the four possible prefixes of the prefix conjugation. Inside the nutty prefix is a dagesh forte. That yod is not a begadkefat letter. So that dot you're seeing cannot be a dagesh lene. Okay? That is a dagesh forte. And this pathak with the dagesh forte is creating a closed syllable, which if I were to transliterate this first form, it would be va, yif, code. Okay, and so you see the doubled yod right here. Va-yif code. So I'm doubling my prefix consonant each time. So, aside from that difference, I still have yif code, tif code, tifkadi f code, just with the va in front. All right, and that makes it identical to the cal imperfect, aside from that special vav prefixing. Okay? Now what I want you to notice is the translation value and its difference. I have vayif code, it's translated as past time. He appointed. If I have yif code, the cal imperfect, then it is usually future. He will appoint. Okay? Go back to third feminine singular. Vatif code, she appointed. Past time. Versus simply tif code, she will appoint. Future time. Or non-past. Okay? These WCI forms will always be translated with past time semantics. I told you for the imperfect, it's normally future, sometimes present, and then on some occasions past. Okay? There's no frequently, seldom, sometimes with the Vayiktol forms, the WCI forms. They are always past time. Okay? There will not be a time that you won't translate it as past. Okay? Now, let's take a look at the forms here, and what I want to do is I'll read them and just make a couple more comments about them. So just listen to them read here. Vayif code, he appointed. Vatif code, she appointed. Notice here that I have a tav that has a dot right there. I want you to compare it to the tav on the imperfect side with the dot there, where tif code is she will appoint in the imperfect. Vatif code and tif code. This dot over here on the right, that is a dagesh what? Lene. Because tav is a begadkefat letter, and begadkefat letters come standard with dagesh lene. Over here, this dagesh is a dagesh what? That's a dagesh forte. How do I know that's a dagesh forte since tav is a begadkefat letter? Well, there's two reasons. Number one, if I go back to the 3MS form, vayif code, the pattern is to always put a dagesh forte in the prefix consonant. So if I know the pattern by looking at the prior one, I know I should just expect a dagesh forte there. But if you didn't know that, and you were just staring at this form, let's say you were parsing it for a test or something, and you were trying to remember, was that a Dagesh Lene or Dagesh Forte? How would you know the difference? Begadka fat letters could take either one. You're going to look and see if there's a vowel sound before it. If there's a vowel sound before a Dagesh, if it's a Dagesh Lene, what would happen to the Dagesh Lene? It would get blown out. Yes. And since this Dagesh is still there, even with a preceding vowel, then that must be a strong Dagesh, right? That's a Dagesh Forte. And when you have a Dagesh Forte, you don't pronounce the Begadka fat letter as a fricative letter. It's not th, but it's that hard stop consonant sound that's being doubled. Va-tif code, not va-thif code, okay? Va-tif code, va-tif code. So, I wanted to make a point of that. To a mess, va-tif code is you appointed, and va-tif kadi, you woman appointed, va-f code, I appointed. Now notice that I've got something a little bit unusual going on here. What I would have expected with F code here when I add the special pointing of the vav is a pathak here instead of a kametz and a doubling dot inside that aleph. Okay, because I've got doubling dots in all the other prefixes. Why does this aleph not have a Dagesh Forte in it? It's a guttural, yes. And gutturals don't take no Dagesh from anyone. And so it rejects the Dagesh Forte and causes the preceding pathak that would have liked the Dagesh Forte following it to compensatorily lengthen to a long kametz, a long A instead of a short A. And that's why we have a kametz here. Either way, every pointing of the prefix vav has what vowel class for its vowel pointing? It's A class, exactly. So it doesn't matter whether it's pathak or kametz, it's A class, and that means it's not a vocal shava, so it's still the special vav, okay? So va, 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 va. That's what you're looking for, and that's what you're listening for. Now on the plurals down below, I have va-yif kadu, they appointed, male or mixed. Va-tif kodna, they appointed, the they is female. Va-tif kadu, y'all appointed, male or mixed group. And va-tif kodna, y'all appointed, female. And then va-nif kod, we appointed. So the good news here is that the semantics of the prefixes is the same for the WCI as it is for the imperfect. If you know your prefixes and suffixes for the prefix conjugation, you will always know who the subject is. All right? That's not new here. The only thing that's new is the special pointing of the vav and the fact that you'll always translate these as past time forms. Okay? All right, so going down the handout, point C here are the distinctive features of the WCI or the Vayiktal form. I mentioned a little earlier that sometimes I'm weak in the knees in terms of wondering how I should label these, and so I do sort of bounce back and forth between calling them WCIs and Vayiktals. Vayiktal seems to be where most people are moving in terms of how they label these. Okay, so what are the distinctive features? Number one, the WCI forms are built off of the prefix conjugation pattern, so you will see all the same nutty prefixes, nun, tav, yod, aleph. Note here, this prefix conjugation appears to be an Old Hebrew preterite tense. If you studied some languages that have what's called a preterite tense, preterite just means past tense, and that happens to be identical to the form of the imperfect, or happens to be identical in form to the imperfect. Later, you'll see the few places where the WCI and the imperfect forms actually differ. For now, you should expect them to be the same. Okay, so most of the time you cannot tell the difference between an old preterite and an imperfect, except for the special vav pointed on it. Number two, The special prefix vav before the nutty prefixes is vav pathak and then dagesh forte in the prefix consonant. The normal pointing of the conjunction vav is with the vocal shava, so it'll look like v. So the vowel pathak, va, should look unusual. The dagesh forte goes inside the nutty prefix consonant. However, since the 1cs aleph is a guttural, it rejects the dagesh forte, and the preceding pathak compensatorily lengthens to kametz. And we've already talked about that. And then number 3, always, always, always translate with past time value. Okay? You come to a WCI or a Vayiktul form, it's always past. So take a look at the example that I have here. I have the expression Shema Adonai Otam Vayizkor Burito. Okay? I've got 2 clauses here that form a sequence of activities or actions. The first one is Shema. Notice it's in the perfect conjugation, and standard sort of translation value for the perfect is past. That's usually where we're going to see it. So, Adonai heard, Otham, them. Direct object marker with the third masculine plural pronoun. Yahweh heard them. Adonai heard them. And this is the perfect in past time. And then my next action in the sequence has a WCI form. Vayizkor. Notice it's not Yizkor, but Vayizkor, with that special Vav on the front, doubling dot in that Yod. This is going to be translated as past time as well. So the perfect, it typically translate past. WCI always past. So Yahweh heard, and he remembered, past tense. Burrito, he remembered his burrito. Now he remembered his covenant. Okay, so there's the 3MS pronoun here. He remembered his covenant. All right? You will, it will not be uncommon for you to see a perfect starting out the sequence of actions and then the subsequent actions picked up with WCI forms. But it is possible to just start with a WCI form in a narrative as well. The book of Jonah does that, which is interesting. The book of Jonah starts with the WCI form. The word of Yahweh came to Jonah, and it's Vayhi. It's got a Va at the front of that form. So you could see it either way, with the perfect starting and then WCI, or just starting with the WCI form. Okay, now number 4. If the sequence of events in WCI forms is broken, and the way to break a statement of a sequence of events is to either stop your sequencing of events to give an aside, to give information that is maybe important to the narrative but isn't the next thing that happens in the narrative, to give background information, or to state what did not happen. If I say John went to the store and he bought ice cream and he ate the ice cream on the way home, those are all things he did. I would see WCI forms. But if I then said, but he did not go home and tell his wife, that's telling you what he didn't do, right? So it's not the next thing that actually did happen. It's a statement of what didn't happen. And so when you break up the sequence of things that are being narrated as happened with what didn't happen, then that's going to become a break in the chain. It's going to be a break in the sequence of actions. Then this new clause that is breaking the sequence will begin with a conjunction vav, and it will be attached to what is typically a non-verb. So the new clause begins with a non-verb, and then when the storyline event sequence is resumed, the WCI form is used again. So let me give you an example of how this works here in this example here. So I have halach, which is clause number 1. Vayilkod ota is clause number 2. Velo shavat is clause number 3, and vayishma is clause number 4. These are 4 activities. 3 of them happened, 1 of them didn't. Okay? Let's take a look. Halach is he went. That's the first action. Starts with a perfect in past time, by the way. Vayilkod otah is a vayiktol or WCI. Notice the special vav pointing, doubling dot in the yod. So he went and he captured it. That's also past time, isn't it? He went and he captured it. That's a 3FS pronoun suffix attached to the direct object marker. Probably the city. Now the next one is a break in the sequence because this is what he didn't do. Velo shavat. So I'm going to have a vav with a non-verb. Here it's the negative particle. Velo shavat. And now I've got a perfect. Okay, when I break up the sequence, typically I'm going to use a vav pointed normally with a non-verb and then a perfect, which will still be past. But he did not, and he did not rest. But then I resume my sequence. Vayishma with the WCI. And the next thing he did was, and he listened. Okay? So he went, he captured, he listened are the things he did. The sequence is broken up with what he didn't do. Velo shavat. And that is using a perfect verb. Okay? Notice that after the first perfect, as my sequence continues, every clause begins with a vav. Va yilkod otah. V lo shavat. Va yishma. Okay? And it is a characteristic of Hebrew clauses that almost every Hebrew clause in the Hebrew Bible begins with a vav. It's just a matter of whether that vav will be the vav consecutive vav or the special vav that makes it a vayiktol form, or whether it'll be just a simple vav. But almost every clause in Hebrew begins with a vav. And as we get into Hebrew reading in the fall or next semester, you're going to see this over and over again as you read Hebrew narrative.